And while it's tempting, and I'm sure it would make some big headlines, don't worry, everybody, I'm not going to try to take off my shirt here.
In a desperate and ill-conceived quest to shore up their flagging union support, the Trump campaign, for some stupid reason, decided to send the world's most awkward person, Trump's vice presidential running mate, JD Vance, to speak in front of the International Association of Firefighters. And it went as disastrously as you might expect. He called them haters, he was booed, and he even talked about stripping, taking off his shirt. It was really awkward. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends. Yeah, I didn't think I would be covering this, and then it happened. I'm like, ooh, we've got to talk about it because it's just so delightfully awkward. JD Vance, again, the world's least likable person. He's even less likable than Donald Trump. He is, according to pollsters, the least liked presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate in American history. And I don't think this appearance at the International Association of Firefighters was going to change anything. So we got a couple of clips, and we're going to play them and unpack them, but brace yourselves for maximum cringe.
Simplify, guys. We got some, it sounds like we got some fans and some haters. That's okay.
Yep, really good strategy to call a group of people whose support you are trying to court haters because they're booing you. I understand why you might be tempted to do that, but if you're a professional politician, it's probably not the right thing to do. You chose to go there and speak in front of them, presumably to court their votes, to court their support, and you're calling those who disagree with you haters. Now, you would think, okay, that's clumsy. Surely it doesn't get worse. Oh, it does. And the boos get louder.
Now, President Trump and I are proud to be the most pro-worker Republican ticket in history. And I want to talk about why we're fighting for working people, why we're going to fight for unions and non-union alike.
So, as you can hear, the boos swell, just increasingly audible. It's almost like a choir. A chorus is back there, booing JD Vance. But of course, it makes sense because him talking about how pro-worker he is. I mean, I suppose he threw in a caveat there that, Donald Trump and I are the most pro-worker Republican presidents. That might still be a bit of a stretch, given that Trump is a New York billionaire real estate mogul who constantly shred union and labor protections. JD Vance, whatever mouthpiece, whatever lip service he pays to labor, in his book like Hillbilly Elegy and other places, he set all of that aside to subordinate himself to Donald Trump. And that is precisely why so many people at that rally booed him, is because it was completely dishonest and disingenuous to suggest that you have any serious pro-worker bona fides at all. And we'll get into that. But you think, okay, so he calls people haters whom he's trying to win over. Sure, he lies to their faces and then they boo him even louder. Surely that's the end of the awkwardness. That's as awkward as it gets. Well, no, actually it gets worse. JD Vance always finds a way. If anything, he is truly an entrepreneur. He is an innovator in awkwardness. It's not really Silicon Valley or tech bro billionaire business. It's more, he is an entrepreneur with respect to awkwardness. He finds awkwardness and he's like, you know what? I think we can make it. I think we can do more. He's an awkwardness exceptionalist, right? He's like, we can do better. We can make things more awkward than this, damn it. And indeed he did. So he was clearly rattled. He tried to insult the Democratic National Convention. He tried to make appeals to aged wrestler Hulk Hogan, and then he failed to stick the landing, and he talked about stripping and taking off his shirt. The whole thing was a mess. Brace yourselves.
The Republican and Democrat conventions we just had, it says a lot who each party chose to put up on that stage. At the Republican convention, we were featuring everyday American workers, and of course, we had Hulk Hogan. And while it's tempting, and I'm sure it would make some big headlines, don't worry, everybody, I'm not going to try to take off my shirt here. Republican and
let's play that part one more time. Here you go.
And I'm sure it would make some big headlines. Don't worry, everybody. I'm not going to try to take off my shirt here.
And I'm sure it would make big headlines, but I'm going to but that's all, folks. Not take my shirt off. Really awkward, but hilarious because it's just happening to the worst person. It's funny. It's funny when awkward things happen to terrible people and terrible politicians like JD Vance. So yeah, For whatever reason, he talked about stripping. Obviously, that's Hulk Hogan's iconic move, grabbing the ring of his shirt, the lapels, and ripping it off. And I guess JD Vance was going for a joke there, but again, it wasn't particularly funny, and he failed to stick the landing. Pretty funny stuff. People are roasting him about it on Twitter, as well you should if you have not yet. But right now, with the election being as tight as it is, obviously the Trump campaign, the Trump Vance campaign is going to try to compete for union votes, right? They're going to go for every piece of the pie they possibly can. That's the extent of their ambition. And again, in the past, JD Vance has been touted as, the friendly, rich Republican, the worker-friendly Republican. He was a guy who was a populist, an economic populist. He cared about, poor rich people in Appalachia, Kentucky and West Virginia and all these places. He really cared about that. That was his shtick before he bent the knee for Donald Trump. So obviously the Trump campaign is going to try to milk that for whatever it's worth, if there's anything left in the bottle. So CBS News actually has a pretty good breakdown on this. Harris girds for battle with Trump over union workers and their big labor bosses. It was one of the most fiery conventions of the moments of the Democratic National Convention. Last Monday night, Shawn Fain, president of the United Auto Workers Union, strode onto stage at the United Center, took off his blazer, and revealed a red T-shirt that read "Trump is a scab." The crowd, filled with party faithful who were wearing the same T-shirt, roared with approval and began chanting Trump's a scab. Fain, an electrician who worked in an Indiana automotive parts factory, is a throwback to the more bare-knuckles archetype of labor leaders. He exalted Democratic nominee Kamala Harris as, quote, a fighter for the working class, and skewered Trump as a, quote, lapdog for the billionaire class, which is true. But while Fain evoked the combative labor bosses of an earlier era, behind that vintage style was a state-of-the-art, tech-savvy campaign machine poised to capitalize on the moment. Before long, the digital foot soldiers of the Harris Walls team, along with the UAW, had plastered the Fain video across social media, garnering millions of views. Thousands of the bright red T-shirts had been sold, and the word scab was trending online. That bit of choreographed theater reflected the methodical planning and preparation by the Harris Walls campaign to find every opportunity to amplify labor's message, and just as importantly, to burnish its own pro-union credentials with the labor leaders that they are aggressively courting. And for good reason. The union vote could be decisive in 2024. This could be decisive with an election this close and with the states that are in play. Aware that Donald Trump's strong performance with union households in battleground states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin may have cost Hillary Clinton the election in 2016, the Harris campaign understands that blue-collar voters may emerge as this campaign season's version of the suburban soccer mom, a pivotal demographic for victory. Quote, there are 2.7 million union members in battleground states, wrote Julie Chavez Rodriguez, the Harris Walls campaign manager, in an August 8th memo shared with CBS News. Quote, that means something when roughly 45,000 votes in key states decided the election 4 years ago, which is true. President Biden won by 7 million votes, but that wasn't what won it ultimately because, of course, we have the Electoral College, an antique that we desperately need to get rid of, by the way. And ultimately, those votes, the electoral votes, came down to 45,000 votes in a handful of swing states. So that's what she's talking about. Last week, Democratic Party convention planners overlooked no detail in wooing labor. A record number, 20% of Democratic delegates were union members, so 1/5. All delegation members from its 50 states and territories stayed in union hotels. Almost all of the physical work at the convention drew up from union labor, from building the sets to the electrical work, as well as the makeup for speakers and performers. And raucous calls-outs to unions were strategically placed in many of the celebratory roll call votes. The Harris campaign sees its tight collaboration with labor as a force multiplier. Quote, we are in a fragmented media environment and it's very hard to reach undecided voters, one campaign official said. Quote, unions are the ultimate validator that can break through the noise and misinformation and lay out the facts on our record versus Trump. It goes on like this. They point out, the brief fallout with the other major union boss from the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, who spoke at the Republican National Convention and was not invited to speak at the Democratic National Convention, even though he desperately tried to squirm his way there. They talk about how even after Trump, basically tried to sanitize his history on labor, then during his really, glitch-ridden Twitter Spaces conversation with Elon Musk, they both laughed and celebrated the fact that they bust attempts at unionizing Musk's companies and that Trump has attempted to do the same for his. I mean, that's not going to endear him to labor. We've also talked in previous videos the really robust success of the Biden administration's domestic policy, the Biden-Harris administration's domestic policy, particularly on labor, the National Labor Relations Board, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, Lena Khan. These are all things that are really, really important, positions that you would not have without a pro-labor administration like Biden-Harris. Under the Trump administration, those important regulatory bodies were wielded against nascent attempts to unionize. And so the fact of the matter is that when President Biden says he's been the most pro-labor president since at least FDR, there's a lot of truth to that. And Vice President Harris was there along the way. And in her campaign speeches and promises, she suggested she's going to take that and run with it if she is elected president. So at least on paper, it makes more sense for unions to more enthusiastically back the Harris-Walz campaign than the Trump-Vance campaign. But this is why JD Vance did what he did. He's desperate. He recognizes that he certainly more than Trump has more credibility with unions. And he's the closest thing that the Republicans have to some sort of populist economic message. And so he's trying to capitalize on it. But as you can see, it's not going well. And that's why he floundered and face planted. And that's why we, quite frankly, should mock him for his stupidity and his disingenuousness. And if you haven't done so yet, I would encourage you to do so. And while you're doing it, try to forget that JD Vance talked about stripping in front of God and country and focus instead on all the boos that he received. In the meantime, you let me know what you think in the comments.